Hello, Gary Stearman. Time for another edition of Prophecy in the News, continuing a discussion with our guest, Bill Salus, who has written this brand new book. It's called Nuclear Showdown in Iran, and it deals with the prophecy of Elam. Bill Salus, welcome once again to Prophecy in the News.
Well, it's great to be back on the show, and I want to thank you for doing this other program. There's so much to talk about in these 6 verses, but there's so much details that we at least 2 shows to do this.
And we just barely covered it last time. We're going to hit the details today, beginning with this prophecy and its timing. Because when I look at Jeremiah 49, and this is verses 34 through 39, if you want to read it yourself, there is it's almost fair to say it's a strange prophecy. A lot of prophecies like Ezekiel 38 are just kind of easy to read. They just go right down through the list, and they just jump out at you, and they're full of details. This prophecy it has to be interpreted. It's very, very interesting. And so with that in mind, let's talk about how this prophecy fits with some of the better-known prophecies of the Bible. Everybody knows about Ezekiel 38, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think sort of the prophecy about Elam sort of got pushed into the shadows because of the lack of a better word, the popularity of Ezekiel 30. In other words, it's Ezekiel 38 and 39, 52 verses of some of the most descriptive Bible prophecy within Scriptures. And I think God intended it to be that way because it's the marquee event that he's going to uphold his holy name. But somehow in the shuffle, Elam sort of got wiped off the pages of history here, and yet we've got a prophecy there that was written at about 596 BC by Jeremiah, a contemporary of Ezekiel. So Ezekiel writes about Persia, but Jeremiah writes about Elam in a prophecy that has not found any fulfillment. And I point out the reasons for that inside of the book. And this prophecy, Gary, is talking about a compelling, world-changing event, really, if it's for our time, as it does appear to be. And we can give them a brief summary of the prophecy, and then we can take off and start talking about the timing. Is that how you'd like to do?
Yeah, that'd be great. And the prophecy has 7 I wills in it, which we talked about last time, which is really fascinating. That makes it a complete statement by God. What is the statement that we find there in the prophecy against Elam?
Yeah, in a summary version, Gary, what happens is that Iran today, because Elam represents that western side of Iran, whereas Persia represented the west of it, and Elam hugs the Persian Gulf there, where the Bashar nuclear plant is. We preface that. What happens is the Lord is fiercely angered, and therefore he brings about a disaster, a judgment, but a disastrous judgment, a calamitous judgment. And it's very strategic. They break the bow of Elam at the foremost of its might, could be representing its nuclear program. Well, the reason we think that's a possibility is because in verse 36 it talks about he will bring the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of heaven, and he will scatter the Elamites toward those winds, and he says there'll be no nation where the Elamites don't go, no nation where the exiles, the refugees don't go. We're talking about a worldwide dispersion. A similar passage in Zechariah comes up and talks about the 4 winds from heavens dealing with the Jews being dispersed. I had dispersed you into the nations of the world. So we have a worldwide dispersion. What would necessitate that today? Perhaps a humanitarian crisis, a radioactive fallout scenario. We talked about this briefly in your other program, and I go into it at great lengths in the book. We have a strategic strike, a disaster. Verse 37 talks about the enemy. Elam will be dismayed before its enemies, plural, enemies. And when you look at the Hebrew word about the dismay, we're talking about they'll be awestruck. They'll stand in awe at the size and scope of this disaster. It is going to be unbelievable. And they have enemies. Today, Iran has enemies. Israel is concerned about Iran's nuclear program. The Arab states are concerned about Iran wanting to advance its hegemony, its Shiite theology throughout the Middle East, and the water supplies that can be contaminated by the strike on the Bashar nuclear plant over there. And then the other enemy would be the international community that is desperately trying to negotiate Iran out of its nuclear program, to stop spinning those centrifuges, and yet Iran's threats are if you hurt our nuclear program, we'll launch international terror. So we've got that going on. And then the good news for Elam, this is the good news, is that it says in verse 38 and 39 that the Lord will set his throne in Elam and destroy from there the king and the princes. Do you realize, Gary, that only at one other place in the Bible does it talk about an earthly location of the Lord establishing his throne? Guess what city that is?
Yeah, Jerusalem.
Okay, well, it's not in America, the second location.
No.
It's in Iran on that area of Elam. I know a lot of Americans think that God sits up in heaven draped in an American flag singing the Star-Spangled Banner, but that's not where this throne is going to be. And if we want to look at that literally or not, and I explain the Hebrew words and everything in the book, there are only two places. And because of that, it says in verse 39, and in the latter days, I will restore the captives of Elam. Those captives, those exiles, it says there'll be no nation where the outcasts of Elam don't go in verse 36. They're going to be restored back into a vibrant place, restored out of their captivity into restored fortunes, which is a theme of other countries and populations in the end times. Israel and Egypt and Assyria and Jordan. Same thing with Iranians. That's the good news. There will be an Iranian remnant that comes through the Messianic kingdom.
Now, I want to take some time to develop the timing question. In your book, Psalm 83, which, by the way, has been one of our great bestsellers here at Prophecy in the News. If you haven't read this one, you need to. Psalm 83, the missing prophecy revealed. Psalm 83 talks about the enemies of Israel doing a certain thing. They want to go up and they want to keep Israel from even being a nation. They want to wipe Israel out level with the ground. And they make no excuses about it. Bad guys. You have Psalm 83, in which this collection of enemies is going to go up against Israel at a certain point. You have Ezekiel 38, a northern invasion by Gog and a collection of other nations. And then you have Jeremiah 49. How in the world do you fit all of these three ideas together and make sense of them?
Okay, well, let's start with Psalm 83. I call them an inner circle in the book. They share common borders with Israel. They're the Arab states and terrorist populations that have burgeoned out from within those states that do not want Israel to exist. They don't recognize the Jewish state, and they have been at war with Israel since it became a nation in 1948, 67, and 73, and there'll be a climactic concluding one according to Psalm 83. But guess what? Iran's not in that prophecy. Ezekiel 38 does have Iran under the banner of Persia. But that I call an outer ring, and they don't share any common borders with Israel. None of the Psalm 83 countries are listed in Ezekiel 38 or vice versa. But guess who else is not listed in Ezekiel 38 or Psalm 83? Elam. Why not? Did Ezekiel not know about Elam? Well, we can't say that for several reasons. One, Elam has a history that dates back to the time of Abraham.
Sure.
It still existed during Ezekiel's time. His contemporary Jeremiah had written this prophecy around just prior to anything Ezekiel wrote. He wrote Ezekiel's ministry probably started around 595. This prophecy from Jeremiah was probably written in 596. It predates Ezekiel's Gog of Magog prophecy. The big clue and clincher for me is several things, because a lot of people will start to think as they read this book, this new book, well, how come Jeremiah 49 and Ezekiel 38 are not just the same prophecies dealing with Iran with more details added? Because that's common in Scripture. You'll find certain details that Zechariah may give, or Isaiah writes something and you pick up some stuff from Jeremiah about it, that type of thing. Damascus is a perfect example. Isaiah 17 talks about the destruction of Damascus. Jeremiah 49, verses just before these Elam ones, verses 23 through 27, adds more detail, it appears, to Isaiah's prophecy about Damascus.
Right.
So how come Jeremiah 49, 34 through 39 is just not more details to Ezekiel 38? Well, several things. One, Elam is a disaster that takes place in Iran. It's clear. The winds from heaven come, they're into Elam, they scatter. The disaster is in Elam. I will strike Elam at the foremost of its might. I will bring back the captives to Elam. That's not what's going on in Ezekiel 38. That battle's in Israel, coming up from the uttermost parts of the north upon the mountains of Israel. They're burning the dead in Israel to a valley. It's two different distinctly locations where these events take place. One of the clinchers for me, that we know Ezekiel knew about Elam is because he also writes about Meshech and Tubal, Turkey. he writes about them in Ezekiel 38, when he talks about Persia also in Ezekiel 38. But he also talks about Meshech and Tubal 6 chapters earlier in Ezekiel 32, and he talks about Elam in Ezekiel 32. He definitely knew about Elam. He made a prophecy about Elam in Ezekiel 32, verses 24 through 24 and 25, which to me are added details to Jeremiah's prophecy. Why did he mention Elam with Meshech and Tubal? But then he takes out Elam and talks about Meshech and Tubal in Persia, because I believe it's a separate, distinct prophecy that probably precedes Ezekiel 38.
Probably precedes Ezekiel 38. In other words, and if I'm listening and hearing you correctly, that would set up a certain scenario that would then, in effect, lay the groundwork for Ezekiel 38. What happens in Ezekiel 38?
Well, exactly. And we do go into detail as to why I say it probably precedes it in the book and also in your Prophecy in the News magazine that you got coming out in July of 2014. So, but skipping to your question now, why it precedes it and how it sets the stage, okay? First of all, Elam represents about 1/6 on a map of modern-day Iran. It is isolated by the Zagros Mountains. Studies have been done that if there was a radioactive disaster, which could be what Jeremiah is foretelling, it would have more adverse effects on that specific area territorially of Elam and on over to the GCC Arab states of Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Oman, because of the way the wind patterns go. It could be devastating for them and yet not filter over into Tehran very much and hurt the other parts of Iran, the other 5, 6 represented by ancient Persia. Because we know Persia's still got to exist to go into a war, to join the Gog of Magog coalition that comes to invade Israel in Ezekiel 38 for plunder and booty and spoil. So they have to exist, and they could still exist. But will they exist as vibrantly as they do right now, ranked number 22 among world armies? Or will they be more like Libya, who's also listed in Ezekiel 38, or a Cush representing Ethiopia down through the Sudans and stuff? You know, Libya's army is ranked 59. Ethiopia's army is ranked number 40. But Russia and Turkey, Russia's ranked number 2 among world armies. Turkey's ranked number 8. Everybody's looking at Persia like, well, they're going to be one of the strong factors in that coalition. Will they be? Or will they go slipping down the scale more toward the army ranking of Libya, perhaps? They're not listed in the first couple verses of Ezekiel 38 with Meshech and Tubal and Magog. Right. They're listed back with honorable mentions in verse 5 with Cush and Put of Libya and Ethiopia. Maybe that's not relevant to what I'm saying, but maybe it is. Why wasn't Persia listed right up front with Meshech and Tubal being one of those stronger forces?
By the way, I should mention at this point that Bill is going to be one of our featured speakers at the Pikes Peak Prophecy Conference called the Prophecy Summit. It's the second one annually, and listen, the last one was phenomenal. You need to make reservations right now because you're not going to have very much longer to do it, I guarantee you. Pikes Peak Prophecy Summit 2, July 25th through 27th, and I assume you're going to be speaking on this subject and other aligned subjects.
Well, the 2 topics for sure I want to cover. We're going to cover this prophecy. We are going to unpack it from head to toe, we'll say. But I also want to give a Mideast update when I'm speaking at the dinner banquet. I want people to know what's going on in the Levant with this stuff going on in Iraq and Syria and Iran, of course, with the nuclear negotiations. We're going to go across the whole Levant, and we're going to talk about the prophetic implications of today's current events.
Great. That's July 25th through 27th. And by the way, you need to know more about the Prophecy Summit. Hello, Gary Stearman. Let's talk for a moment about Pikes Peak 2, the Prophecy Summit at Colorado Springs, July 25th through 27th. New discoveries all around. Bob, it's going to be great.
It is. The Marriott Hotel in the shadow of Pikes Peak. You couldn't ask for a better place or better speakers.
Better speakers like Dr. Thomas Ice, perhaps the world's leading authority on the pre-tribulation rapture of the church. You don't want to miss that. And Bob, Bill Salus is going to be with us.
Showdown in Iran, a brand new discovery, a new prophecy that's been forgotten for 2,000 years.
Talk about timely. And what about L.A. Marzulli? Never without a surprise of some kind.
Back from Peru with the latest on the Nephilim. Last but not least, Stan Deyo.
Stan Deyo. Speaking of new discoveries, Stan Deyo is going to be talking about something you've never heard before.
The discovery of the Garden of Eden. You're going to want to be there.
July 25th through 27th, Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak 2, the Prophecy Summit. Well, Bill, let's go ahead now and dig a little deeper. I want to talk about the tribulation. I believe the tribulation to be 7 years long. And I think the thing that kicks off the tribulation is when the man of sin, described by Daniel, signs a 7-year covenant with the leaders of Israel. And he gives them permission to go ahead and commence sacrifices and oblations at their temple. And then you have a 7-year period. We call it the tribulation. It kicks off the great and terrible day of the Lord. And there's much discussion about the rapture of the church. Is it pre-trib? Is it mid-trib? Is it pre-wrath? And we've been in this discussion, in and out of it for many, many years. And I know that discussion is going to continue right up until the day of the rapture. But looking at the tribulation, where would you place the prophecy of Elam?
I would place it pre-trib, and I'll give you several reasons for it. First of all, I think it precedes Ezekiel 38 and 39 for sound reasons. And I won't go into those now because I want to talk in more detail about the Ezekiel 38. See, by a process of reason and logic, we can take Ezekiel 38 more than likely out of the tribulation. So if it's a pre-trib event, Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Gog of Magog invasion, that Russian, Turkey, Iranian-led invasion, if we can take that out of the tribulation, any prophecy that might precede it can also be taken out of the tribulation, becomes pre-trib. So we'll go backdoor and we'll go forward. Psalm 83 is not part of Ezekiel 38. It has to set the stage for Ezekiel 38 because Israel has to be dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, and that can't happen as long as Israel's enemies of Psalm 83 are surrounding it. That's why they got walls and checkpoints right now. After Psalm 83, Israel can dwell in that type of security that Russia and have that kind of plunder and booty that Russia comes to invade. So I put Psalm 83 before Ezekiel 38. I put Jeremiah 49 before Ezekiel 38, the prophecy of Elam. Why do I put Ezekiel 38 this side of the tribulation, pre-trib? Okay, several reasons. The strongest one is that they're burning weapons for 7 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you understand the tribulation is broken in two halves. The first half, Israel lives in this pseudo-peace. They are not fighting the Arabs of Psalm 83. They're not destroying Damascus in Isaiah 17. They're living in a pseudo-peace. The second half of the tribulation, which is the commencement point, is when the Antichrist goes in and abominates the Jewish temple. And even Jesus says in Matthew 24, verses 15 through 19, when you see that event, speaking to the Jewish people at that time,
right,
don't go and get your canned goods and your hat and everything in Judea. You flee immediately. You get out of Dodge as quick as you can. You don't burn weapons that second half of the tribulation. Okay?
Right.
If anything, you grab a weapon to use it on your way out. You don't grab a weapon to burn it, right? So Ron Rhodes, Dr. David Reagan, and other people, myself, Dr. Fruchtenbaum, lean toward the possibility that you could start burning weapons 3.5 years before the tribulation begins. Remember, Israel burns the weapons of Gog and Magog for 7 years. You could burn the weapons for 3.5 years. The tribulation could start. That pseudo-peace could take on for 3.5 years. You could burn the weapons for 3.5 years there too. There's your 7 years. But you can probably not be burning the weapons when you're fleeing for your life. Right. They may have 8, 9, 10 years worth of weapons, but something might abruptly cut it short. And they stop it at the 7-year mark because they're fleeing for their lives. Also, I believe that God mentions my people Israel 3 times in Ezekiel 38 and 39. That whole prophecy is dealing with God upholding His holy name in the midst of His people Israel. He's going to prove He's a promise keeper. He made a covenant with Abraham that He would have eternal descendants of Jewish people, and that they would have a promised land. Russia, Psalm 83, Ezekiel 38, they're trying to prevent all that from happening. God's not going to allow that to happen. He's going to shift the thinking to the holy God of the Jewish people who's upholding His covenant, who sent Jesus Christ to die for the sins of humanity. He's going to do it before the tribulation, in my estimation, because humanity has to make a big decision at that time. Do I worship the promise-keeping God who just kept his promises and covenants with Abraham and survived the Jewish people from the most massive Mideast invasion of all time, the Gog and Magog invasion? Or do I turn my attention to this deceiving Antichrist figure over here and his system, which is going to be very popular at that time?
Right.
So God, I think, is going to give humanity a clear-cut choice, just in time, in the nick of time, before this guy comes on the scene.
Very, very interesting. So, as we begin to look at these prophecies, and it's like anything else, the closer you get, the more detail the Lord seems to open up in Scripture, and we're beginning, almost like coming ashore on a foggy day, we're beginning to see items on shore that are popping into focus, and we must be very, very close to all this happening. I'm not asking you to name a length of time, but this all seems very close given what's going on in the Middle East today.
Well, I think there's several things we need to focus your viewers' attention on. All end times Bible prophecies are converging, and they're converging rapidly, which tells us we are deep, deep, deep in the end times. I don't think there's many of the scholars out there today that would argue that are paying attention to Bible prophecies. The other thing, too, when we talk about imminent prophecies, the rapture is a signless event. That's an imminent prophecy. That could happen at any given moment. People used to fault recently, Hal Lindsey was talking about that in the 1970s. Well, my comment to that is, we're 40 years closer. Paul used to talk about it 2,000 years ago to the Thessalonians. We're 2,000 years closer.
Right.
Don't think it's not going to happen, folks. It could happen in any twinkling of an eye moment. But you know what else is imminent? Jeremiah 49, verses 34 through 39, the prophecy of Elam. Your viewers could wake up on any given morning and missiles could be flying and Iran's nuclear program could be struck. I believe that is already a campaign that Israel is prepared to enact for its survival. And that prophecy required several things that are already in place. One, the Lord had to be fiercely angered to create this disaster. Well, God is angry, to be honest with you, with Iran right now for three reasons. They want to wipe Israel off the map. That doesn't bode well with God. Two, they worship Allah, which is a false god, and he's a jealous God, according to Nahum 1, verse 2. And three, they are persecuting Christians. They have a national campaign to close home churches, imprison pastors, and this has led to wide-scale persecution of Christians, which Iran is sporting the number one evangelical population in the world. It has burgeoned so out of control that the Islamic regime has had to repress it. That does not bode well either. The other thing, too, Iran has to have enemies. They've got them.
Right.
Iran has to have the makings for a potential humanitarian disaster because there will be a worldwide dispersion. And it has to be the latter days, because in the latter days it talks about in verse 39, which one of those four things is not in place? They're all in place.
This is fascinating. The more you talk, the more ideas are forming in my mind as I think about it. Prophet Daniel, for example, exiled to Babylon, then spent the major portion of his life in Persia. A very well-known historical figure there. We associate Persia with great evil. For example, the prophecies of Daniel, we read about the Prince of Persia, who is an evil angel that controls events in Persia. But on the other hand, Persia seems to be kind of a battleground, a spiritual battleground, out of which can come good as well as evil. And it was no accident that Daniel ended up there and making his great prophecy out of Persia. And so what I'm getting as I listen to you talk is that Persia is kind of a key location where the Bible is concerned. And when I read Jeremiah 49, 39, and it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, it sounds like the Lord has a special blessing for those people in the latter days. And this fits with what you're saying about a Christian revival going on over there. This whole thing is really, it's not a depressing picture, I guess is the word I'm looking for, as much as it is an enlightening picture. So you can see God at work here in the midst of a very evil place doing some good things.
Yeah, well, this is the backstory, Gary. As I started to write this book, I did not plan on getting in as deeply as I did into the book about the backstory of the Christian revival that's going over there. Right now, the Lord is rolling up his sleeves, And he is fulfilling, in my estimation, Joel chapter 2, verse 29, where he is pouring out his Spirit, his Holy Spirit, on his menservants and maidservants. And we know in that connecting passages, which Peter quoted at the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, that he would pour out, young men would have dreams and old men would have visions, vice versa. Young men would have visions, old men would have dreams.
Right.
There are miracles going on over there. There are healings. There are sightings and encounters with Jesus that you're hearing about. And these are leading throngs of Iranians to the Lord. And that's why there's a problem for the Islamic Iranian regime. You have a duel going on between the forces of good and evil right now before our eyes in Iran. And these Christians over there are hungering for discipleship. They're getting their discipleship through satellite TV. Iran Alive Ministries with Hormoz Shariat. Wonderful situation. Joel Rosenberg calls him the Billy Graham of Iran. I've been on his TV show. He's been translating my teachings to them. He's teaching them these prophecies. They want to know what's going on. These are Christians that are hungry. It's the Acts 2 model. The Lord is personally building the church over there right now.
And we could go on, but remember to pray for the Christians in Iran today. They are struggling. The book, Nuclear Showdown in Iran, Revealing the Ancient Prophecy of Elam. Yours for $14.95 plus shipping and handling when you call the 800 number on your screen. But as always, here at Prophecy in the News, we like to put together packages that bring you not only great information but great value. And we're offering, along with Nuclear Showdown, this package featuring a DVD, Bill Salus, America and the Coming Mideast Wars, Psalm 83, The Missing Prophecy Revealed, and Terry James' book, Cauldron, which is, I think, maybe the most descriptive word for the Middle East. All of these items, all four, we're calling the Forgotten Prophecies package. Forgotten because, in a way, the prophecy of Elam is a forgotten prophecy, which Bill has brought to the forefront in his book. Again, the Forgotten Prophecies package, Nuclear Showdown, the America DVD, Psalm 83, the book, and Cauldron by Terry James. All yours for $49.95 plus shipping and handling. It'd be about a $70 value if you bought these items separately. $49.95 plus shipping and handling. If you call the 800 number on your screen, ask for the Forgotten Prophecies package. But the featured book, Nuclear Showdown in Iran, you've got to read it. Bill, we've just got seconds left. Wish we had longer to talk. But, I think we have brought conclusion to this matter because it's, in the end, it's a prophecy that sort of warms your heart. God is at work.
He is. The ministry mission statement with Iran Alive Ministries is transforming Iran into a Christian nation in this generation. You read the passage in the latter days, he's going to bring back the captives of Elam. He says in the verse before, he's going to set his throne up in Elam. God is busy. He is reaching out personally, pouring his Spirit out into China and Iran and these places, trying to make a final connection to bring as many people into the family as possible.
Amen. Wish we had more time. I'm Gary Stearman. Hey, keep looking up, everybody. Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported program made possible by our many friends around the world. Be sure you tune in every day for breaking news and our daily prophetic news updates at prophecyinthenews.com or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/prophecyinthenews.